Did you know there's an international scientific consensus that GMOs are safe? Did you know that the European Commission spent 100 million euros studying this issue over a period of 10 years? We're talking about taxpayer-funded studies, 100 million euros. And they came to the same conclusion. What do you think about that?
So, this is something that's kind of dear to my heart, being that code changing is something that I've noticed in the emergent properties of nature. Like, I like to look at patterns a lot. So, when I look out here, I see, various geometric shapes, things like this. And very quickly, when I realized that genetics was uncovering the code basis to everything that's in our environment, I immediately questioned if that could be changed, if that's something we should do. I mean, the ethical background to that is insane to even think about it first. But you also need to consider that if we don't do it, how are things going to end up? Because 98% of this planet, all the species, end up being extinct for one reason or another, whether it be diseases or starvations or whatever, things like this. Changing the codes could alter that, and that's where my focus is mostly on this. The political aspect, of course, there's always going to be problems involved in that. If you look at something from a political angle immediately, that should always be the end thing that you look at, not the first thing that you look at, because if we were to do that, we wouldn't even have the innovations that we do, for instance, because a lot of them come from military. See? Things of this nature. Now, here's the thing. GMOs in general, when you actually look into it, most of them are safe. Aspartame was one thing that really stuck out to me during this. So I would always hear people touting off about aspartame, and they would immediately try to reference the fact that aspartame comes from E. coli. Well, very quickly, when you look into anything that is elementary in genetics, especially synthetic life, you realize that E. coli, amongst other things like yeast and other organisms of this nature, essentially can be altered very simply because of how simple their structure is. It doesn't have to do with the fact that somebody looked across all of nature and said, let's find something that's harmful or whatever, that scares people, E. coli, there's that word, they have no clue what's going on. And they alter this, and it produces a substance. Keep this in mind, that this is just like when Earth first started to form, that the toxin that these things produced that first started to live here, that were eating photons, was oxygen. So that was poisonous to them. They ended up suffocating themselves in general. I mean, these are very general statements, but, you've got to look at it from all these different angles in the way life and nature is. So let's come back and bring it back around to GMOs and where we're at, right? So this is the situation. We are producing this insane amounts of humans. And this doesn't have to do with size of planet Earth, okay? Because we could figure out ways to kind of get around a lot of the things that people say about population issue, okay? The example would be starvation. Okay, so people are like, here's the common idea. One person needs like an acre of land to produce their own food, agriculturally, as far as ancient styles of doing it, organic, quote unquote, right? No, it's not how this is going to be able to work. We're going to have ways that we can accelerate this, just like we have done. There was a period of time that we started to introduce things like, all these fertilizers and stuff. And we're going through another one of those tiers in the upgrade of our food and how we work as a human species, because this is what we have to do. We can't continue to go along in our environment and just completely destroy it. We have to change from being like an animal in nature that doesn't care about the surroundings, doesn't renew any of the resources, but look at nature as a custodian, someone who takes care of it, someone who looks at the codes and says, can I alter this code and make it better? Can I go in there and change this so that it has protection from disease and it can produce this massive amount of food? Can I go into this corn or this rice or whatever it is that a lot of these people eat, and can I alter that and make it so it's more nutritious for them? Hell, can I take the best parts of this fruit and combine them together to make it the most tasty, nutritious, everything that you could ever imagine? It's already happening. That's the thing about this. Do you like Honeycrisp apples? Because I hate to break it to you, that was naturally, you don't find that in nature. Okay? So, just like what this video tries to imply, I'm going to give you my opinion on this. Keep in mind, I'm no expert. I don't try to be, especially in any of these videos. You know, and I myself love Honeycrisp apples. And nobody on this planet is going to convince me that that or corn or the flour or the rice that I'm eating is going to kill me. Because I hate to break it to you people, what you have going on right now is the end aspect, the political aspect of what we're discussing. It's not the code changing that is the problem. Okay? If you're afraid of corporations, I agree with you. I see that there's an issue with that. However, you have to understand that you cannot just get away. This is the 2016 major thing that's happening is bioengineering. You're not going to be able to just ignore it. You're not going to be able to get rid of it because you're afraid of it either. The best thing that you can do is understand what is happening and look for the things that will work and support them. You know, one thing and a reason why I'm trying to do these videos too is that I'm trying to create a model of something that could be different from the way that we look at things. Because you can do battle all day against these evil forces. I love all these people out here like, I'm anti whatever. That's great. But do we have something to replace what you think is horrible? And if you keep telling me that you want to stay the same, I'm sorry, that isn't going to work either, because we can't continue along this road. In America, when you got like 1 in 6 children, they're like starving, that's completely nuts. I could go into a whole aspect of this, the politics in this. Let me just give you a brief synopsis on some of the explanations of how I understand this from my personal experience. Grocery stores in America are told by their attorneys to throw out perfectly good food rather than donate it because they're afraid that they're going to get sued. Okay, now I'm sure that everyone thinks in their head there's some other, I've heard of people doing things differently. Yeah, that's fine. I also heard of a group of people that used to take that stuff and sell it at the flea market instead of throwing it away. Yes, all of that happens. However, this just gives you a reason why that some of this might be happening. Okay, so if we were able to produce these GMOs that make an amazing amount of food, I mean, just so much so that we don't know what to do with it, who would complain? No one would be starving. What is a problem with this? You can't do that in nature. Most of the time, you don't produce like we're doing in nature normally. Everything we're doing at this point is completely altering normal stuff. So either we're going to ride the ramifications of not knowing what our long-term changes are going to be, or we're going to look at this from a big picture perspective and paint the picture that we want it to be. It's that simple. Do you want a world where a tree has 40 different fruits on it and you can walk out in the back of your patio and pick whatever you want? Or do you want to just continue along this road of... This is the thing too, okay? Back just as recent as colonial times, there were 1,000 more types of apples. Okay, we have genetically altered all of this stuff down to the small, this is what you get type thing. Now, what I'm proposing is, imagine this. Now we start taking the best aspects of all of those and combining them to things like the Honeycrisp and make it super nutritious. So when you hit that thing, it's just crispy, tasty, amazing. It's like you just ate 8 apples. That's what I'm talking about. Get your heads out of this, I saw some activist in Russia that has absolutely no credentials at all in genetics, right? Not a specialist, not an expert. And this guy's claiming that he had a rat that grew a tumor or something. And then, here's the best part. Here, let me just go to the aspartame thing again real quick. If you go look into that study that everyone goes around and touts, they don't look into it. No. What happened was, he didn't have his control groups proper. You go look into the other rats that didn't even get fed aspartame, they started having the same problems. So when the governing body that was looking over top of this, the legislative arm that was like investigating, and they got that report, they immediately were pointed out that that is not correct science. And what's sad to me is that these activists go around and use that as part of their argument. You have immediately discredited yourself. I can't even have a conversation with somebody that does that kind of thing. And then if you bring it up to them, oh, no. They're going to move right on to the next thing about how, you know, they got weird vibes off of the GMO stuff. Right. I'm sure you got weird vibes. Here, while you've got weird vibes, let me know how that banana is working out for you. Because if it had not been genetically altered the way it is, you wouldn't be able to eat it. I could go all the way down the list. I don't need to, because I'm just going to put this video together here for everybody and sit down, enjoy it. I've tried to cut out all the boring stuff for those of us who don't have attention span, but here you go. Without further ado, this is why I am pro GMO.
Do you try to avoid GMOs in your diet?
I do. Yeah.
Tell me why.
There's just a vibration with GMOs.
Yeah. Can you feel it, baby? I can too.
Bishop Don Magic Wand, what is a GMO?
Well, I'm not really sure. You have to make me familiar with that. What is a GMO?
To answer these questions, we need to go back in time about 10,000 years. That's when people first started domesticating animals and cultivating plants for food. By picking organisms with desirable traits and mating them together over and over again, people were able to mold species to meet their dietary needs. The classic example is corn, which started out as a tropical grass called teosinte, with small, nearly inedible kernels. Over thousands of years, ancient farmers in Mexico transformed the grass into the delicious, starchy treat we like to eat today. We now know those ancient farmers were manipulating the DNA of the teosinte plant. As few as 5 changes to its genome, the long strands of DNA that encode for proteins, create the dramatic differences we see between teosinte and corn. Scientists call this process artificial selection, and it's made all kinds of unappetizing plants edible, from wheat to rice to almonds and bananas. What's different about modern genetically modified foods is the speed and precision with which we can make changes. Now, instead of selectively breeding for traits, we can go directly to the DNA responsible, snip it out, and transplant it into newly developing plants and animals. If these snippets come from the same species, scientists call the new organism cisgenic. Cis means the same. But if the DNA comes from a completely different plant or animal, scientists call the new organism transgenic. Trans means to cross.
I'm a plant geneticist. I study genes that make plants resistant to disease and tolerant to stress. In recent years, millions of people around the world have come to believe that there's something sinister about genetic modification. Genetic modification is not new. Virtually everything we eat has been genetically modified in some manner. Now take a look at the ancient ancestor of banana. You can see the large seeds and unappetizing Brussels sprouts. An eggplant, so beautiful. Now to create these varieties, breeders have used many different genetic techniques over the years. Some of them are quite creative, like mixing 2 different species together using a process called grafting to create this variety that's half tomato and half potato.
And a professor at Syracuse University has done something no one has seen before. He has grown one tree that will produce 40 kinds of fruit.
When I started, it was a matter of essentially collapsing an entire orchard down onto one tree. This is the first of the European plums.
The tree of 40 fruit has been growing for 9 years. 14 are installed around the country, most in public places like this one at the center of the Syracuse campus.
Breeders have also used other types of genetic techniques, such as random mutagenesis, which induces uncharacterized mutations into the plants. The rice in the cereal that many of us fed our babies was developed using this approach. It wasn't until the 1990s that scientists finally uncovered the genetic basis of resistance. In my laboratory, I isolated a gene for immunity to a very serious bacterial disease in Asia and Africa. We found we could engineer the gene into a conventional rice variety that's normally susceptible. And you can see the 2 leaves on the bottom here are highly resistant to infection. The same month that my laboratory published our discovery on the rice immunity gene, my friend and colleague Dave McKill stopped by my office. He told me that his graduate student, Kenong Shu, and himself were studying an ancient variety of rice that had an amazing property. It could withstand 2 weeks of complete submergence. I went to the greenhouse and I saw that the conventional variety that was flooded for 18 days had died. But the rice variety that we had genetically engineered with a new gene we had discovered called sub1 was alive. Now, many people don't mind genetic modification when it comes to moving rice genes around, rice genes and rice plants, or even when it comes to mixing species together through grafting or random mutagenesis. But when it comes to taking genes from viruses and bacteria and putting them into plants, a lot of people say, yuck. First, take a look at papaya. It's delicious, right? But now, look at this papaya. This papaya is infected with papaya ring spot virus. In the 1950s, this virus nearly wiped out the entire production of papaya on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. A local Hawaiian, a plant pathologist named Dennis Gonzalez, decided to try to fight this disease using genetic engineering. He took a snippet of viral DNA and he inserted it into the papaya genome. This is kind of like a human getting a vaccination. Now take a look at his field trial. You can see the genetically engineered papaya in the center. It's immune to infection. The conventional papaya around the outside is severely infected with the virus. Dennis's pioneering work is credited with rescuing the papaya industry. Today, 20 years later, there's still no other method to control this disease. There's no organic method, there's no conventional method. 80% of Hawaiian papaya is genetically engineered. Some of you may still feel a little queasy about viral genes in your food, but consider this. If you bite into an organic or conventional papaya that is infected with the virus, you will be chewing on 10-fold more viral protein. The brown you see is frass, what comes out the back end of the insect. To control this serious pest, which can devastate the entire eggplant crop in Bangladesh, Bangladeshi farmers spray insecticides, but we know that some insecticides are very harmful to human health, especially when farmers and their families cannot afford proper protection, like these children. Cornell and Bangladeshi scientists decided to fight this disease using a genetic technique that builds on an organic farming approach. Organic farmers like my husband Raul spray an insecticide called BT, which is based on a bacteria. This pesticide is very specific to caterpillar pests, and in fact, it's non-toxic to humans, fish, and birds. It's less toxic than table salt.
Here's the thing that happened, in my opinion. Monsanto developed something called glyphosate.
Okay.
Or rather, a salt of glyphosate. This is a way to put this chemical onto soil and have it stay there pretty well.
Okay.
Anyway, it kills everything that's green. kills everything by inhibiting the shikimate acid pathway.
So you're literally salting the earth.
Yes.
So.
Yes. However, what Rob Fraley and these several other guys who were working at Monsanto, they behated Monsanto, what they did is develop a gene that lets the shikimic acid pathway get completed in the green plant anyway.
Gotcha.
And this is the so-called Roundup-ready soybean, corn. Cotton was the first one.
Right.
And there's two things.
So now everybody is familiar with Roundup as a weed killer.
It does kill weeds. It kills any green plant.
Any green plant.
With a couple exceptions, which are quite relevant. Anyway, he argues that glyphosate's really not such a bad thing. Compared to all the other herbicides, glyphosate's pretty benign, which I've done research now, and I've decided that's true. I've changed my mind about genetically modified foods. That's the top line.
So it's the top line. You've changed your mind about GMOs.
And so I looked into it. There's no difference between allergies among GMO eaters and non-GMO eaters. There is a big difference in inputs from an agricultural standpoint. Organic farming takes a lot more water, takes a lot more tillage.
Yes.
It ends up, actually, you end up with less diversity of microbes in the soil with modern Roundup-ready crops because you don't have to till. You don't have to turn the soil over to kill the weeds.
Right.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name's Rob Edwards. I'm the Head of Agriculture, Food and Rural Development at Newcastle University. My own area of research expertise is actually crop protection. At the moment, we're battling with herbicide resistance in blackgrass. But one of my interests, both former and currently, are new technologies that we can bring into food security. Instead, we could think about synthetic biology as being a raft of different approaches that we can bring to bear to one of the most pressing demands we have in terms of a global challenge to us as mankind, our response to the food production challenge over the next 30 years. And so here we're really talking about utilizing the very best quality science and engineering approaches that we have to come up with some rational solutions to what is an extraordinarily large challenge for us to take on in the next 30 years. And this next slide gives us some kind of idea of the scale of that challenge. Every day there are 200,000 more people on the earth born. They've got to be fed. That means in 2030 we're going to have an extra 2 billion people to feed. The land that we have available to us is pretty much fixed. We can put a bit more into agricultural production. The environmental costs of that would be extremely undesirable. We're already using 40% of the land mass of the earth for agricultural purposes. So we have a real major challenge on our hands here. How do we feed all these extra people in such short order? And the slide at the bottom there illustrates in sort of diagrammatic form what that means. It means a hectare of land that was producing enough food for 2 people in 1960 is going to have to produce enough food for 5 people in 2025. You know, this whole area has been underfunded now for a quarter of a century, and it's only the last 3 to 4 years we've really seen significant funding going into agricultural research again, both in this country and probably more widely across the developed world. So we have an enormous challenge on our hands. And importantly, the technologies that we're currently using are being pretty much maxed out in terms of what they can deliver for us. In advanced agricultural economies, as we have in the UK, we're now seeing the plateauing of many of the yields of our major arable crops. This particular graph is winter wheat, and it's shown that since 1995, despite the best ministrations of farmers, we have a very advanced farming community here in the UK. We're using lots of pesticides, lots of nutrients. We are hitting a plateau of yield productivity, which we don't entirely understand what this yield plateau is about, but we know it's a glass ceiling that's extremely difficult to push through. That's not good news if you've got to face up to all of those issues that I was talking about earlier in terms of increasing food production. So the point is, we're not in great shape now, but we do know how to do this. In 1947, Norman Borlaug and others took on the challenge of producing more food for the earth in a concerted way, which brought to bear all of the best technologies that we had in engineering, in chemistry, and increased global production of arable crops in many instances by up to 10% per annum. And that improvement ran right the way up into the 1980s. It secured food security for the planet pretty much for half a century. And now we've run to the end of that cycle. We now need effectively a second green revolution. Now, the core technologies that we needed to deliver that green revolution are based around mechanization, chemical inputs, fertilizers, crop protection, and of course, genetics. So I'd like you to think about synthetic biology at this point in time of a kind of human development in much the same way that people didn't think about synthetic chemistry at the advent of the 20th century, because many of those advances in the first green revolution were underpinned by enormous advances in synthetic chemistry. It gave us agrochemicals, it gave us improved fertilizers, it produced much more efficient fuels to drive mechanization and agricultural systems. And importantly, in the food sector, it added enormously to the value and pleasure of eating foods, as well as improving the shelf life of many of our foodstuffs. This innovation was introduced in a generation. So at the beginning of the 20th century, there was very little chemistry going into agriculture. By the 1950s and 60s, it was flooded with it. It revolutionized the way in which we cultivate our crops and produce our food. So I'm thinking here, this is a model that we can think about how we might be able to utilize new technologies like synthetic biology in much the same way we used synthetic chemistry 100 years ago. So where do I see the inputs coming in? In the first 10 years, they're going to be incremental. I think we're going to see a move away from many of our dependencies on chemistry to biological intervention in terms of crop protection, for example. I can see us also needing to use bioenergy produced through synthetic biology-based processes to drive mechanization, which is a very highly energy-dependent process in agriculture. Nutrient recycling, currently we're just wasting a lot of the nutrients that we put on the ground. I can see there that biological reprocessing on an industrial scale would be an enormous benefit to agricultural sustainability. Diagnostic devices, and importantly, I can see already developments where we can see synthetic biology improving the shelf life of food, helping us to reduce food waste. So small incremental increases in how we apply this new technology to help us make our food supply more sustainable and resilient. I think after 10 years, we don't have a crystal ball to see where everything is going to go. But I think, first of all, synthetic biology is going to tell us a lot more about engineering desirable traits into plants. We need to fundamentally change the crops and the animals that we eat to better reflect the lifestyles that we live today. We eat too many calories, but we have too few nutrients with it. We need to engineer our foods, perhaps in the first instance utilizing conventional breeding. But as the challenges grow greater, perhaps we start to need to think about using synthetic biology to accelerate the rate in which we can improve our foodstuffs. And we can also improve important input traits into agriculture, making it more sustainable. So the question I'm going to phrase broadly, and I've got a more specific one that will be asked in a moment, is around this idea. We live on the edge of a trilemma, this depletion of resources, increasing population, and an unstable climate. And I would put it to you that we have such major challenges in this whole sector that we would be very ill-advised not to turn to synthetic biology amongst other important technologies to help us through the next few years.
Now, I've given you a couple examples how genetic engineering can be used to fight pests and disease and to reduce the amount of insecticides. My final example is an example where genetic engineering can be used to reduce malnutrition. In less developed countries, 500,000 children go blind every year because of lack of vitamin A. More than half will die. For this reason, scientists supported by the Rockefeller Foundation genetically engineered a golden rice to produce beta-carotene, which is the precursor of vitamin A. This is the same pigment that we find in carrots. Researchers estimate that just 1 cup of golden rice per day will save the lives of thousands of children. But golden rice is virulently opposed by activists who are against genetic modification. Just last year, activists invaded and destroyed a field trial in the Philippines. When I heard about the destruction, I wondered if they knew that they were destroying much more than a scientific research project, that they were destroying medicines that children desperately needed to save their sight and their lives. Some of my friends and family still worry, how do you know genes in the food are safe to eat? I explained that genetic engineering, the process of moving genes between species, has been used for more than 40 years in wines, in medicine, in plants, in cheeses. In all that time, there hasn't been a single case of harm to human health or the environment. But I say, look, I'm not asking you to believe me. Science is not a belief system. My opinion doesn't matter. Let's look at the evidence. After 20 years of careful study and rigorous peer review by thousands of independent scientists, every major scientific organization in the world has concluded that the crops currently on the market are safe to eat, and that the process of genetic engineering is no more risky than older methods of genetic modification. These are precisely the same organizations that most of us trust when it comes to other important scientific issues, such as global climate change or the safety of vaccines. Raoul and I believe that instead of worrying about the genes in our food, we must focus on how we can help children grow up healthy. We must ask if farmers and rural communities can thrive and if everyone can afford the food. We must try to minimize environmental degradation. What scares me most about the loud arguments and misinformation about plant genetics is that the poorest people who most need the technology may be denied access because of the vague fears and prejudices of those who have enough to eat. We have a huge challenge in front of us. Let's celebrate scientific innovation and use it. It's our responsibility to do everything we can to help alleviate human suffering and safeguard the environment. Thank you.